the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable House now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter. Mr. Holness. Mr. Shaw. Dr. Chang. Mr. Samuda. Mr. Montague. Ms. Grange. Mr. Henry. Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Mackenzie. Mr. Chuck. Mr. Vaz. Mr. Darrell Vaz. Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Green, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, none of them here. Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mr. Main, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Terrelong, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Baz, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Jamaica Hansard Parliamentary Proceedings of the Honourable House of Representatives for the session 2013-2014. and January 21, 2014 through March 25 for 2014. Annual Report of the Scientific Research Council for the financial year 2015-2016. Annual Report of the Postal Corporation of Jamaica Limited for the financial year 2016-2017. The Toll Roads Registers Regulations 2018 and the Toll Road Registers Regulations Resolution 2018 under the Toll Roads Act. The Toll Roads Technical Designs, Operations and Maintenance Standards Regulations 2018 and the Toll Roads Technical Designs, Operations and Maintenance Standards Regulations Resolution 2018 under the Toll Roads Act. The National Housing Trust Strategic Mandate Review Commission Report for November 2017.
Members, I wish at this time to acknowledge the presence of a number of guests here today. Members of the Senate, former members of the Senate, former members of Parliament, ambassadors, and other foreign dignitaries. I should say local and foreign dignitaries. I wish that the hosts at this time welcome them. I have been advised that the President of the Senate is to be specially welcomed. It's not all the time we have you with us, so please welcome the President of the Senate. Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate to the Honorable House of Representatives. I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 9th day of March 2018, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Protection of Geographical Indications Act and for Connected Matters was passed in the Senate with the following amendments as circulated. Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, QC, CD, JP, President of the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that consideration of the Senate amendments to the bill shortly entitled the Protection of Geographical Indicators Amendment Act 2018 be considered and approved at a later date.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Henry.
I beg to give notice that the next meeting of the House I will move the following motions. The Toll Roads Act, Toll Roads Registration Regulations Resolution 2018. And whereas by virtue of Section 32(1) of the Toll Roads Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the authority may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of this Act. And whereas by virtue of Section 32(2) of the Act, the regulations made under subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And where it is desirable that the Toll Roads Registers Regulations 2018 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Toll Roads Registered Regulations Resolution 2018. 2. The Toll Roads Register Regulations 2018, which were laid on the table of the House on the 28th day of March 2018, are hereby affirmed. 2. The Toll Roads Act, Technical Designs, Operations and Maintenance Standards Regulations Resolution 2018. And whereas the virtue of Section 32(1) of the Toll Roads Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the authority may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of this Act. And whereas by virtue of Section 32(2) of the Act, the regulation made under subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas it is desirable that the Toll Roads Technical Designs, Operation and Maintenance Standards Regulations 2018 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. The resolution may be cited as the Toll Roads Technical Designs, Operations and Maintenance Standards Regulations Resolution 2018. The Toll Roads Technical Design, Operations and Maintenance Standards Regulations 2018, which were laid on the table of the House on the 20th day of March 2018, are hereby affirmed. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Warmington.
Mr. Speaker, we continue the debate today on the appropriation bill, and I ask you at this time to invite the Most Honourable Prime Minister to make his contribution.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable members, senators and former members seated in the well, excellencies of the diplomatic corps, His Worship the Mayor of Kingston, distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, patriotic Jamaicans here and in the diaspora listening, watching and following virtually via the media. We all give God thanks for sparing us individually and collectively so that we can meet here to discuss the business of the nation, report on the achievements of the fiscal year past, and consider the plans and programs for the year coming. Mr. Speaker, our thanksgiving is appropriate. Though we had our share of climate variability resulting in unseasonal rain and flooding and consequently negative economic impact, we have been spared the total devastation wreaked upon our neighbors in the region, for whom we again spare a thought. Mr. Speaker, I'm always humbled when I consider the awesome responsibility entrusted to me by the people of Jamaica to lead the management of public affairs and create the environment in which our people can self-actualize. I do not carry this responsibility alone. I stand here literally with my family in this house. My wife Juliet is a member in her own right. I stand here with an astute and innovative team of advisors. I stand here with a responsible and enterprising cabinet of ministers. I stand here with diligent and committed chairmen and members of boards. I stand here because of effective and efficient permanent secretaries, heads of agencies, and their staff. I stand here because of strong supporters and constituents who thought it important to exercise their civic responsibility to vote. I stand here in partnership with civil society, the church, and the private sector. I stand here bolstered by the hope and prayers of every well-thinking Jamaican who believes that Jamaica will increase in peace and prosperity. I stand here by the grace of Almighty God. I stand here, Mr. Speaker, to make a difference in the lives of the people of this country. And though some may wrongly characterize politics as nasty and brutish, it is undoubtedly the means by which the widest and the most profound changes can be made to the lives of the largest number of people. I want to start my presentation today speaking about how we are solving a problem that will make a big difference in the lives of many. For some, it may be a small problem, but I want to exemplify the point that small actions can make a big difference. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, I've spent the last 2 years focusing on roads and gullies, and it has really lifted the built environment of the constituency. This year, I will turn my attention to improving the housing stock. This is especially critical as many of the houses in their current condition pose a fire hazard. And many MPs in here can identify with this. Come summer, we know the number of fires increase. The member from Central Kingston, the member from West Kingston, South End. We all know that the housing stock is really in need of attention. But there's another problem, Mr. Speaker. In January of this year, 4 children, a 1-year-old twins, and 2 3-year-olds, 4 children, perished in a fire that destroyed their homes in my constituency. A lit candle started the fire. Although electricity was on the premises, this particular household was without, and they relied on open flame lighting at night. It is the case that there is a significant number of rural and urban households without electricity connections, or that are disconnected pending payment, that rely on open flames as their source of light. As a result, every year right across Jamaica, and I have tracked several cases in my constituency, we see these tragic incidents of children perishing in fires ignited by candles and lamps. Mr. Speaker, so far this year, there have been 13 deaths due to fires, 8 adults and 5 children. With simple and inexpensive actions, government can make a difference in the lives of energy-poor households, and particularly and significantly reduce or virtually eliminate the risk of these tragic fires. I have therefore directed the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology to develop a program to make solar lamps available to energy-poor households. And an initial quantity of 5,000 solar lamps have already been secured, and a system of identifying and distributing these solar light solutions to needy households is being developed. Using solar solutions to replace open flame light sources is an established policy response to address energy poverty and there are many such programs successfully implemented all over the world. This is a real opportunity for social enterprise to support the ecosystem around the production, installation, user education, servicing, and recycling of these solar lamps. To this end, I have directed the HOPE program to develop a national service corps to support all elements of this program and to work with existing social entrepreneurs in this area. These would include members of our Jamaican diaspora, such as Nathaniel Pete of GenX, which is a renewable energy company that is providing this very service in countries in Africa. We are not just giving solar lamps. We want to make it so convenient and practical to use these solar lamps that households no longer use open flame lighting sources such as candles and lamps. After the full implementation of this program, no child should perish in a house fire caused by a candle or a lamp used for lighting. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will agree with me that too often the investigations into these fires reveal that the parent or legal guardian left the child in the care of another person who themselves are either children or not capable of taking care of children. While this program will remove one of the risk factors in such fires, ultimately, however, parents and guardians are responsible for the safety, care, and protection of their children. We must educate, support, and empower our parents so that those who want to do better will, while ensuring that the organs of the state are in a position to protect children from those parents who refuse. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica faces a solid waste management crisis. I get the complaints all the time that our built environment is not looking as clean as it should. I get complaints about Kingston City in particular, some of our rural towns. This is evident in our towns and cities, rural areas, waterways, on our beaches, and in the sea. The main evidence of this crisis is the prevalence of improperly disposed of and unrecycled plastic all over our natural and built environment. It is not just a nuisance. It is a devaluing of the cleanliness of our environments, a real threat to our ecosystems, and the efficient working of our civil infrastructure. There have been many attempts at introducing national solutions for proper disposal of plastics. We continue to work on a complete solution to this complex, multi-sectoral, and multifaceted issue. With the collaborative action of stakeholders through the National Partnership Council, the Partnership for Prosperity, the private sector has presented the government with a proposal for a plastic bottle return system, which will see funding coming from the private sector for a deposit and payout on return mechanism. The consensus on the part of the producers and users of plastic bottles is a major step in overcoming improper disposal of plastic bottles. The government will support the plastic bottle return system with the necessary regulatory and financial support where possible. There are other initiatives being considered by the government with regards to plastic bags, plastic packaging materials, and styrofoam. Senator Matissa Muda is here in the well. He brought a resolution to the Senate proposing a ban on styrofoam. That, amongst other things, are being considered, and at a later date, the decisions of the government will be made known in this regard. But until then, I believe that we are making progress with the private sector themselves coming on board to develop this system of buying back plastic bottles and putting up the cash themselves for the initial start-off of the project. And I think that's a simple action that is going to make a big difference to our environment. I want to talk, Mr. Speaker, about action on hope. Action is hope, which is action. Hope is the flagship social intervention and support program of the government. It focuses on targeted assistance with housing support, education, training, and economic opportunities, support for persons in productive activities in communities, and engagement towards sustained employment. A critical element of the HOPE program is the engagement of youth through a system of apprenticeship and national service called LEGS, which means learning and earning while giving and saving. HOPE is helping our people to excel. Mr. Speaker, the exposure given to our young people under the HOPE projects allow them to build life skills, positive attitudes, and attributes of good citizens. We want to maximize the potential of all our young people and provide opportunities for them to self-actualize. Let me report on some successes so far. More than 14,000 young people were engaged through the HOPE Youth Summer Program, and we have just started the recruitment process for this summer. Over 5,000 unattached young people were trained in core skills, values, and attitudes, and are ready for placement. 2,000 interns have been placed in various National Service Corps across government, in agencies including the UDC, the National Housing Trust, National Water Commission, the Port Authority, National Land Agency, the Administrator General's Department. They are working in digitization, GIS mapping, maintenance, and customer service. 380 youth have been trained in document digitization under the Youth Employment in Digital and Animation Industry, the YEDI project, and are now placed. Mr. Speaker, more opportunities will come on stream this year. 500 young persons will be placed at the Ministry of Health in the Vector Control Corps and the Medical Assistant Corps. This will help, Mr. Speaker, with disease prevention. They will go around in communities to look at things like breeding sites for mosquitoes. You agree with that, member, from North Clarendon? They will go into communities and advise on the proper disposal of garbage. These are all important things that our young people can do. They can learn the skills, they earn from it, they are giving back to the society, and built into the program is compulsory saving. 6,000 young persons will be placed across ministries, departments, and agencies in documentation and the digitization core, in keeping with our policy of digitizing the government. 1,000 interns will be placed at the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Fisheries as part of the verification and audit core. What will they be doing in that core, Mr. Speaker? I see the minister looking at me. The minister is well aware. He is the one who devised it himself, and the minister without portfolio. Mr. Speaker, too often we get statistics coming from the field. These statistics need to be checked. we need to create and update the registry of farmers. We need information on the crops that are growing. These young people will be trained, attached to the ministry, the MICAF ministry, and sent out to assist the extension officers and other program officers in ensuring that they get the right information. They are not extension officers. In other words, we don't have 1,000 extension officers, precisely. So this will help to bolster their agricultural aids. So, Mr. Speaker, the National Youth Program will now be absorbed under the National Unattached Youth Program will now be absorbed under the HOPE program, and the aim is to double the number of persons that are engaged per constituency. Per constituency. Mr. Speaker, we will now engage 200 per constituency, targeting a total of 12,600 young persons to be now attached and contributing to the productivity of the nation. Mr. Speaker, I heard the complaint of parliamentarians, and I'm a firm believer that we must include the parliamentarians in these kinds of projects, and so I've given a direction that the constituencies get an allocation. So the MPs are excellent agents, I find, in identifying the young people who are in need and who are right for placement in these projects. So I'm hoping to get the full cooperation of the members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, all ministries are on board, and budgetary allocations are made accordingly to ensure that adequate funding is in place. In addition, HOPE has secured $60 million through the Development Bank of Jamaica to increase training and placement island-wide. The Jamaica Information Services has benefited from over $28 million from the Chase Fund to digitize the archives, which contains video footage, photographs, and audio files compiled over the decades. This project will employ persons from the HOPE program who will be trained in media archive management skills and intellectual property management. This will not only provide our young people with marketable skills and experience that makes them more employable, but it will open up opportunities for innovation and players in the creative industry to use print and electronic material that will promote Jamaica. It is the intention of this government to provide more opportunities to set our young people on the path to achieving prosperity. Mr. Speaker, now more than ever before, more unattached youth are being engaged in meaningful ways and increasing their productivity. Mr. Speaker, we are giving them legs to step up in life. They are learning, earning, giving back, and saving. Mr. Speaker, let me again note for the record the JDF support for the LEGS initiative with the recruiting of new members. The Jamaica National Service Corps have already completed 2 batches of recruit training of over 220 persons each batch. They are now undergoing further development training at varying stages of their initial 1-year engagement. A 3rd batch is currently going through basic training, and they are scheduled for completion in June 2018, at which time a 4th batch will commence their training. This batch is now going through the process of signing up for full service as enlisted soldiers. And I must point out that all of them have chosen to enlist as full soldiers. Mr. Speaker, the new process of recruiting members for service in the JDF through the initial 1-year national service period is widely accepted and supported. In the future, I hope to promote a policy where every unattached male between 18 and 24 has to do a compulsory 1-year national service with the JDF. Were it not for resource constraint, Mr. Speaker, I would have brought that policy to Parliament already. And I know that I am not the only one who feels strongly about this. I know if the member from Central Kingston were here, he would stand up and applaud that. For unattached, the policy would be for all unattached youth, 18 to 24, not going to school, no prospects of employment, must do 1-year national service. That would, of course, take significant resources. But we have started now. We have started. We have started. And as the economy grows and the country prospers, we will be moving in that direction. It's important, Mr. Speaker, because I was involved in a campaign recently which elected the member from Northwest, St. Andrew. And while on the campaign trail, I met someone who person turned out to be a football coach. And he made a very profound point to me. He says, you don't know that the gangs are recruiting. He said, as a coach, he is competing with gangs for his players. I think the country should wake up to this understanding that the gangs are actively recruiting our young men and giving them opportunities and alternatives. The government has to be proactive in this regard and ensure that we don't lose our young men to the gangs. Mr. Speaker, hope is a critical tool in the whole of government approach to sustainable growth. We are engaging our young people through all means, including through the zones of special operations and the security operations island-wide. As we expand hope even further, having now worked out the modalities and operational activities related to the merger of HEART NTA, the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning, the National Youth Service, and the Apprenticeship Board, we are now able to provide a coordinated suite of training services and programs for wide-ranging youth needs. We are now examining modalities in which we could invite the private sector to participate in offering internships and apprenticeships after we have done the initial personal development and training skills. Mr. Speaker, it is very satisfying to meet young people who are participating in the service corps or another form of engagement with the HOPE program. They are grateful and excited. They feel connected, attached to a purpose. We are giving more young people opportunities to realize their potential, and by doing so, giving Jamaica a better and more hopeful future. Again, Mr. Speaker, a simple, relatively simple action of government, but something that is having a huge impact on the lives of the ordinary Jamaican. Mr. Speaker, the increasing use of modern network technology is changing people's daily social and economic lives, creating new ways for greater participation and innovation, efficiency, transparency, and democracy. Today, anyone and everyone can engage interactively in the digital space. I'm even seeing the leader of the opposition these days sponsoring posts on Facebook. So, I mean, yes, he's in the digital space. Everyone. More services are being offered online, and more customers are expecting online services rather than standing in line for service. You know, Mr. Speaker, recently I read a report ascribed to the newly elected PNP-YO president proposing online voting as a way to gain the interest of young people and native internet users. I found it interesting because her party totally rejected the very means by which this kind of e-governance would be possible, the national identification system. To support transactional activities, secure entitlements and provisions from the state, and to adequately plan for our citizens, there must be a civil registry that uniquely identifies every person, secures their data, and allows for verification of the identity as needed. Without that, there is no hope of any e-voting. Mr. Speaker, the National Identification System will provide a comprehensive and secure structure to capture and store personal identity information of individuals. NIDS will become the primary source of identity assurance and verification and will improve service delivery, security, and governance for the citizen of Jamaica. By way of update, the National Identification and Registration Act was passed in November 2017, and the Governor General gave his assent on December 8, 2017. The IDB loan to fund the NIDS project was approved by the IDB board on December 8, 2017, and the loan agreement for US $68 million between the government and the IDB was signed in February 2018. I want to point out that of the $68 million US, which was wrongfully circulated as being used only for a national identification system, only 20% of that amount will be used directly for the national identification system. Only 20%. The rest of it will be used to actually build out the ICT infrastructure of government. Yes, so that is where all the servers will be, that we put right throughout government to make sure that the software is there, everything that is needed for a digital government. That is what that loan is for. So we are going to become a digital society. Make no mistake about that. We are 90% complete with all the business processes needed to implement NIDS. A legal working group will be established shortly to develop the regulations, and I want the country to pay attention to this one because there was there was a concern that the NIDS bill, now the Act, did not benefit from wide consultation. I'm not going to debate that point, but I want to ensure that the regulations, which are actually, in my opinion, the more important part of the legislative piece, that benefits from wide consultation. So I've instructed the NIDS team to ensure that everyone who has any concern, that they be contacted, that when the committee is put together, that it is publicized so that people can send in their concerns, and their concerns should be addressed. In terms of public education, Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that last year we did 68 consultations, and up to today we have done 37 consultations and presentations with interested groups and individuals. Mr. Speaker, concerns have been raised about privacy and data protection. We wish to assure the public that the government is putting in place a necessary legislative framework with the Data Protection Bill, which is now before Parliament, as well as protections built into the National Identification and Registration Act and pending regulations. The legislative framework will be supported by ensuring that Jamaica procures the best quality system and processes to protect and host our data. The request for proposals for the NID solution was published in local newspapers, and the IDB website also published it on April 25, 2017. The first stage of the procurement process was completed in January 2018. In stage 2, the shortlisted vendors will be asked to submit a final technical and financial proposal for the NID solution in April next month, 2018. A high-level technical team across the GOJ, along with local and international cybersecurity experts, will evaluate and recommend the best solution for Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica now leads the region in developing its framework to become a digital society. On full implementation, I am sure that the ease of doing business, public order and security, citizen participation, and financial inclusion will all improve. Mr. Speaker, this is, in my opinion, a no-brainer action, but it was a very difficult action. But still, it will yield great results for a wide number of people.
Prime Minister, I think you should take a rest while the
Mr. Speaker, I now ask for the Prime Minister's time to be extended sufficiently for him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members, for agreeing to listen to me to the completion of my presentation. I assure you, I assure you, it will go quickly and smoothly. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to actions in the economy, infrastructure, and housing. These are not simple actions, Mr. Speaker. They might be a little bit more complex, but nonetheless, these actions will bring the prosperity we all desire. Mr. Speaker, last year I emphasized Jamaica's competitive advantage with respect to BPO investment. I also noted increased focus on the knowledge processing outsourcing KPO sector, which involves more value-added activities such as application and software development, market research, data analytics, information technology, managed services, medical and insurance billing, and legal process outsourcing. Additionally, nearshoring of outsourcing operations has grown and continues to offer tremendous opportunities. Kingston is fast emerging as an outsourcing location for high-value services, with new developments and expansion of existing operations across the corporate area and Portmore. In order to promote and increase awareness of Jamaica's BPO industry, the Caribbean's first independently funded BPO conference, Outsourced to Jamaica, O2J, supported by the government and existing BPO players and stakeholders, will take place April 11th to 13th, 2018, during Jamaica's National Outsourcing Week. The conference will bring together global experts, technocrats, local entrepreneurs, government officials, BPO leaders, buyers, and service providers. Mr. Speaker, we continue to grow this industry. An estimated additional 10,000 jobs have been created in the sector in the last year. Bringing the total amount employed in the sector, estimated by JAMPRO, at 32,000 Jamaicans. I remember when in 2007, 2008, we had about 8,000 people, between a little less than 8,000 persons employed. The industry is growing, and it has amazing potential. Now, I do pay close attention to the rapid advance in technology, particularly artificial intelligence, which could place these jobs at risk. And I think that it would be foolhardy of the government to turn its labor force fully in the direction without having sight of using it as a stepping stone for our labor force to attract other forms of outsourcing that are ahead of the technological changes. So I take the point that we don't rest on these jobs. We will do what is necessary to upskill our labor force so that the labor force can attract other forms of outsourcing into the country. Mr. Speaker, we continue to focus on two most critical success factors for sustainability in outsourcing: availability of purpose-built space and adequacy of the labor pool. An estimated additional 800,000 square feet of space were built or retrofitted for BPO operations last year. And I have a list of them here. I won't go through them. In 2018-2019, the push to increase space by both the public sector and the private sector will continue. The government has signed off on a partnership initiative to develop a new comprehensive BPO campus on lands at Hollope Road, which will see the development of 300, Hollope Road, yes, will see the development of 300,000 square feet of purpose-built BPO space. I emphasize it, further details will come, but there's a reason why I'm emphasizing that. Because it is strategically located in what we want to develop as the University Township Belt. On Hollope Road, you will get near UTEC. So that, for strategic reasons, we are pushing that development because it could create a network, a nucleus right there, a new industry, a new node of economic activity, which will be very symbiotic with the university, the various government agencies that are there, and the schools that are in that area. So this is a very strategic BPO development. 63,000 square feet of BPO space was built in Montego Bay, in the Montego Bay Free Zone, by the Port Authority. That will be opened in April, and that will employ an additional 1,500 to 2,000 new workers. A new BPO campus is being constructed at Portmore Informatics Park. That will have 160,000 square feet of new space. That is being done by the Factories Corporation. There is Bioprist in Freeport, Montego Bay, 80,000 square feet. And a very interesting one, Usain Bolt's building on Half a Tree Road, 60,000 square feet. And there is an additional 50,000 square feet in Mandeville, I gather, for Sutherland Global's operation. So there are significant investments being made in the BPO sector. Given the projected growth opportunities, we must have persons ready to take up the position. So the Heart Trust NTA and the Business Process Industry Association of Jamaica in February 2018 signed a memorandum of understanding targeted at providing wide-ranging skills training for Jamaicans to take advantage of the jobs in the fast-growing sector. Mr. Speaker, this is a very bright spark in our economy, and the deliberate, instrumental action of the government in supporting and facilitating the investment. Our action is creating these results. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to action on land titling. Very important. Very important. Land titling. Mr. Speaker, Peruvian Hernando de Soto Polar says in his book, The Mystery of Capital, Why Capitalism Triumphs in the West and Fails Everywhere Else. Very famous Latin American economist. He says that massive exclusions generates two parallel economies, one that is legal and one that is extra-legal. An elite minority enjoys the economic benefits of the law and globalization, while the majority of entrepreneurs are stuck in poverty, where their assets languish as dead capital in the shadows of the law. To protect their assets and do business, the extra-legals create their own rules. However, these informal arrangements are not standardized, transparent, or enforceable. Extra-legals, therefore, create their own social, political, and economic problems that affect the society at large. De Soto believes that the real cause of informality and the poverty it generates lies with the flawed legal system of developing nations that make it virtually impossible for the majority of their people and their assets to gain a stake in the market. In our analysis of the problem, of course, whilst we would agree with this, I'm sure that many persons would also want to point to the history of the economy, the history of slavery, and the unequal distribution of the land resource, unequal endowment. So I don't think the two theories are competing. Together they help to explain why it is that we have land tenureship and occupancy in the way in which we have it. But the two theories can lead to two different outcomes. One theory would lead to the outcome that says fix the market. And the other theory would say redistribute. And I think that is the core of the problem if you analyze the Jamaican situation, because there's one set that will say redistribute, disregard law, disregard order, just go and squat on the land. I wonder which set ascribe to that. I wonder which set of persons would ascribe to that. Right? No, I mean, obviously, we will say this now, but you know, 20, 30 years ago, the argument wasn't give them titles, the argument was give them land. And I made sure to... okay, I can accept that. I can accept that.
Oh, today.
But...
Order, please.
So, Mr. Speaker,
Prime Minister, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for returning the order. I only digress to explain how policy initiatives arise from different philosophical and core principle perspectives. And I'm not here criticizing any of them, but just so that the Jamaican citizen can understand that core philosophical beliefs lead to different outcomes. It is clear to me that what the poor majority in the developing world do not have is easy access to the legal system, which provides a gateway to economic success in the advanced nations of the world and for the elite in their countries. It is in the legal system that property documents are created and standardized according to the law. This process of documentation in a public ledger or register builds a public memory that permits society on an equal footing to engage in crucial economic activities such as identifying individuals and property and establishing property rights and obligations between individuals and properties. This public ledger of property, which is transparently secured, this public ledger of property transparently secures the rights and entitlements of the recorded owner, in turn facilitates the market in determining the value and price of the property and the risks associated with the property. This is the basis on which property becomes an asset. And that's a profound statement, Mr. Speaker. Not all property is an asset. Yes, a critical part of a property becoming an asset must be a legal system that identifies it and assigns ownership in a transparent public register that all can access and get information about the asset. Not all property is an asset. Anyway, this means the value of the property can be used to acquire other benefits for the owner, such as access to credit, mortgages, insurance, or the property could be conveyed for sale. In the same way that we are seeking to create a public ledger registry of identity of individuals in the NIDS, we must now seek to give identity, formal, unique, and justiciable ownership to property. So, the leader of the opposition and myself have no difference in this regard. Well, you'll tell me later. But in this regard, I think there is consensus that we need to do the land titling. Historically in Jamaica, land ownership practices are informal. This is so particularly in the rural areas where agriculture is a major economic activity. Consequently, insecure land tenure is a major challenge for many small farmers. In the absence of a title, landowners, and in particular small farmers, are not able to access loans for future economic development. This undermines their capabilities for capital investment and potential wealth creation. There are currently, as at March 2018, 837,988 parcels of land in Jamaica, of which an estimated 500,245 parcels, amounting to 59.7%, have registered titles. The remaining 40.3% are unregistered. Approximately 40% of all parcels of land in Jamaica cannot now realize their economic value for their owners. And it's mainly small farmers, mainly small holders of land. So that is the extent of the seriousness of the situation. So, Mr. Speaker, I concur with the leader of the opposition when he states that there is no single area of national life that requires a more radical treatment than the issue of land and land titling. In January 2017,
Yes, listen.
long before the leader of the opposition took office,
Long before.
and even before he announced his land ownership commission in April 2017, my cabinet considered and gave approval, among other measures, for the merger of the Land Administration and Management Program, LAMP, and the National Land Agency, NLA, to create a public body that is purposely designed, tasked and resourced to systematically see to the titling of all parcels of land in Jamaica. The merger is in keeping with our public sector rationalization plan. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Look here.
Mr. Speaker, you know, there's an important point to be made here. In 2002, the IDB made a recommendation to the then PNP government that what they should do is exactly this. Merge LAMP and the NLA. You would know, you were the minister.
16 years ago.
Hold on. That this was made then, you know. So what we are doing, we are not saying that this is our bright idea. We're not saying that. And it is absolutely important that I put that on the table. What I'm saying is that we are the ones who are implementing it. We are the ones who are taking the action to do it. We are the ones who will ensure that Jamaicans get their land title. Action. So you see, there's an argument about credit, because that side took all the time to say we do it, is our idea. You know, so I'm not going to try to in any way take away credit from anyone. I don't believe in that. I believe that the brain is not all in one head. But we can have a mind share. A mind share. And that has always been my stance. So, Mr. Speaker, there have been many studies and recommendations done on the matter of land ownership and titling. Another commission to study the problems may add some academic value. However, this government is implementing. We are taking action. The roadmap has been prepared. The LAMP merger, the merger of LAMP into the NLA to create this new titling agency, and the legal machinery will start officially April 1, 2018, next month. An extensive review of other jurisdictions in addition to local body of knowledge and experience in this area was done in order to develop an effective operational scheme for the newly formed agency. The study addressed adjudication systems, land tenure regularization, land registration, compulsory systematic land registration. I want to pay attention to that, compulsory systematic land registration, policies and legislative frameworks, and administration and sustainable land management. All of that was studied. The final report of the consultant has now been issued. Among the recommendations approved by Cabinet is that Jamaica should adopt what is called systematic land registration. And, you know, people listening could go and research that. It's being used all over the world, in Cambodia, in Ghana, in all over. Because Jamaica is not the only country that has this challenge. This is a process of land titling of a designated area. So you designate an area, it could be a parish, and you say every single parcel of land that is not registered must be registered. It uses a participatory approach and an adjudication mechanism. It is recognized globally as the most effective means of methodically registering land and providing landowners with a title. This is to be implemented along with the current voluntary ad hoc approach. So the two approaches where you get up today and say, you know what, I'm going to title my land, and you go through the process, fine, you can go and register, or you can be a part of the process when it comes to you. So both strategies will work parallel. These broad policies will be implemented within a legislative framework which will require amendments to the Registration of Titles Act, the Registration of Titles Cadastral Mapping and Tenure Clarification Special Provisions Act, and the Limitation of Actions Act, among others. It is projected that 20,000 parcels of land will be registered with titles over a 3-year period and will be partly funded by the National Housing Trust in the sum of $2 billion. Systematic land registration results in a lower cost per parcel, and increased registration can be done in a shorter period, whereas the voluntary system of registration takes a much longer time to complete. Under the current LAMP, the cost of producing a title is $192,000 per parcel. Under the proposed systematic program, the cost of producing a title will be reduced to approximately $134,000 per parcel. And so the funding from the NHT will help to create a system of credit where you can go and borrow the money to get your title, and the funding is there. As the agency develops its know-how and efficiency, and the process of systematic registration becomes accepted and more resources are added, the rate of titling will increase. It is possible that within a generation, we could have 80% of all parcels of land titled in Jamaica. We are not just talk and theory and commissions. When it comes to land ownership and titling, we are substance. We are taking action to transform lives. Yeah, I'm going to switch. So. Mr. Speaker, it was important that I addressed that point raised by the leader of the opposition about titling. Because it is the want of the opposition to always try to capture what is called the social justice ground. Yes. That we are for the poor. But you know, the problem with that, the philosophical problem with that, is that the strategies you employ end up impoverishing the already poor. Yeah. Because no, and I'm not trying to make a political point. I mean, it's a point that could easily be written in a thesis, because the question would be asked. The question could be asked: if the idea was proposed to merge the two and go with systematic titling, and that was proposed how long? Why, if there was this genuine urge and concern, why didn't you do it then? So yes, it falls to us now to do it, but I have to make this point because it is an unfair posturing that there is now this genuine concern about title. And I think I have to put that in the public domain so that the public can make a genuine judgment. The question is, who is doing the actions to cure and relieve you of your poverty? Not just talk, action. I sat quietly and listened to your trollics last week, you know. Yeah, that's how it is, you know.
Order, please. Order.
You know, I don't ball and I get licked, you know. I just take them. All right. Actions in logistics and ports. Mr. Speaker, an important development during the first year of the life of this administration was to conclude the concession agreement with CMA-CGM. And let me just for the record state that we were not the ones who originated this agreement. The divestment actually started with us in 2007, carried on by your government between 2012, wasn't completed. We came, inherited it, and completed it. So I'm not claiming that it was this government that divested the port. All right? That just for the records. But we concluded the concession agreement with CMA-CGM, requiring the company to assume operating responsibility for the Kingston Container Terminal and to undertake the critical investments required to develop the facility into a modern, world-class terminal. The objective is to restore Kingston to the position as the most competitive transshipment port in the region. On July 1, 2016, Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, a fully owned subsidiary of CMA-CGM, assumed responsibility for the terminal, and in the last 18 months have been aggressively investing over $450 million in the terminal, US dollars. Among the achievements to date are the following, and countries should be aware. Access channel and basin of the Kingston Harbour have been dredged to now cater to the largest vessels traversing the Panama Canal, which have a capacity of 14,000 TEU. That placed Jamaica in good standing for transshipment. The Gordon Quay is being entirely rebuilt to better withstand more severe earthquakes and other disasters. Of the 1,200 meters of berth, 600 meters have already been rebuilt and have recently been returned to service. During the remainder of the 2018 calendar year, the other 600 meters will be rebuilt in 2 phases. Already, vessels over 11,000 TEU capacity are being successfully processed at the terminal, even though the construction work is incomplete. The terminal has been totally repaved. New ICT infrastructure has been installed, including a new high-speed computer system, fiber optic communication system to facilitate modern CCTV and other security devices. A new terminal operating system has been implemented to coordinate all the activities of the terminal in a far more efficient manner. A new cargo handling equipment has been acquired and commissioned, including 2 new gantry cranes, 21 straddle carriers, 4 empty container handlers, 3 train tractors, and 12 forklifts. A new engineering workshop has been commissioned in January 2018, designed to facilitate improved maintenance of the terminal equipment. But importantly, Mr. Speaker, over 200 new jobs have been created, primarily equipment operators and engineers, with the overall employment increasing from 800 when operations were taken over to just over 1,000 in January of this year. The company is aggressively pursuing the investment as agreed under the concession agreement. Already, it is clear that as soon as the construction phase is completed, the volumes will increase to fill the 3.2 million TEUs of which the terminal will be capable. Mr. Speaker, complementing these investments in the terminal, the Port Authority of Jamaica has during the past year invested in creating a modern maritime services environment in partnership with the private sector. The Port Authority has acquired 2 new very modern pilot boats, which assures the availability of pilot services to ensure safe navigation of every new vessel, of the new very large cargo vessels to and from the terminal. Mr. Speaker, the Port Authority is at an advanced stage of implementing the port community system, which will complement the Asicuda system already implemented by the Jamaica Customs Agency to ensure that the island will have a modern technology platform. Together with the terminal operators, the Port Authority and Customs have developed plans for much enhanced security at the port with control points to manage and track both cargo and people on the terminal. Currently, the terminals in Kingston are served by 12 major shipping lines and with over 100 weekly port connections. Kingston is currently served by the most comprehensive feeder network connecting the port to all points on the east coast of North America, the east and west coast of South America, and all of Central America. With the new developments now taking place, the Port of Kingston is well on its way to being restored as the leading terminal in the region. Mr. Speaker, the developments now at hand, at an advanced stage at the terminals in Kingston. The attention of the government is on developing the lands adjacent to the port into a modern, competitive, near-port logistics center. I know the member from St. Andrew Western has an interest in this and would love to hear what I'm about to say. These include the lands lying between the causeway and the terminal, referred to as West Terminal lands, the lands currently occupied by the Kingston Free Zone and the Jamaica International Free Zone, the lands referred to as the old zinc factory lands, which are immediately adjacent to Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, and lands at Tinsipen, which are separated from the terminal by the Marcus Garvey Drive roadway. The plans are to develop all these lands to house modern logistics facilities, which will be connected to the terminal by an efficient and cost-effective transport system, with the boundaries of this entire area sealed and protected. The objective is that cargo entering and being processed in the logistics complex will effectively be treated as extraterritorial unless they cross the perimeter into the customs territory. The objective is to attract companies that wish to have their cargo repackaged, finished, labeled, repaired, and assembled to have these services undertaken in the near-port logistics facilities. Already, Kingston Wharves Limited has launched its new 160,000 square feet total logistics center, and already the entire volume has been exhausted. Kingston Wharves has also leased some of the lands at Tinsipen with a view to converting Kingston into the automobile logistics center for the region. Mr. Speaker, the Port Authority has entered into a contract for the construction of a modern 200,000 square feet logistics facility immediately adjacent to the Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, and construction, which has begun, will be completed before the end of the calendar year. The technical studies for the development of the remaining near-port lands have been undertaken. Work will commence on the build-out of these areas immediately following the development of the new facility. A contract is being negotiated with a major international development company for the development of the remaining facilities on a joint venture basis. An international tenant attraction program is also underway. The legal and regulatory framework required to create a more business-friendly environment, this is being implemented, and the development of the Nearport Logistics Center in Kingston is in progress and rapidly gaining momentum. This government is taking action to turn the long-talked-about logistics hub into a reality. Action on cruise shipping in Kingston. Mr. Speaker, last year I gave a directive to the Port Authority that they should seek to develop Kingston as a port of call for cruise shipping. Earlier this year, Cabinet approved the development of a cruise shipping terminal at Port Royal, creating a platform for the restoration of cruise shipping in the Port of Kingston. Port Royal is one of the most fascinating locations in the entire Caribbean, with well over 500 years of incredible history, full of the most interesting characters to ever have lived. Since the devastating earthquake which suddenly sank most of the town, in its heyday, it has been sitting below the surface of the water for over 300 years, silently waiting, an asset for Jamaica. The Port Authority has identified modern technology which will allow berthing of cruise ships while being highly respectful to the fragile and extremely important environment in Port Royal, with specific reference to the sunken city. The solution is a floating articulating berth which unfolds under electronic controls to meet the ship, capable of offloading a cruise ship vessel in half an hour. The new berthing system requires no piling of the harbor. The system has received the support of key agencies including NEPA and the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. They haven't spoken to you yet. I will have that rectified. The Port Authority is responsible for the establishment of the berth and all the related infrastructure. Already the berth has been ordered and is under construction. Technical work and engineering designs for the landside facilities are at an advanced stage of completion. Mr. Speaker, I saw some of the plans for the development of Port Royal. Excellent. They have gone to great lengths to preserve the authenticity to include the residents so that they are a part of the authentic product and to preserve the environment. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, provisions will be made to ferry guests across the harbour of Kingston to numerous attractions on the city side. So we will have the return of the ferry. Visitors will also be able to go and enjoy and experience Lime Key. Mr. Speaker, we have been talking about this for years. For years. Mr. Speaker, action. We are doing it now. Mr. Speaker, we are taking action on the port of Montego Bay, doing many things there, redeveloping the main cruise berth. You know, we're developing a second porting terminal, all kinds of things happening. I won't go into all the details, but action is taking there. But I want to focus a little bit, Mr. Speaker, on action on the developments in Falmouth. bringing the benefits of cruise tourism to the people. We are taking action in that regard. Mr. Speaker, and I tell you this, I am particularly proud of the work we are doing in the historic town of Falmouth to develop an authentic tourism product by including the people. The local people must benefit from tourism, but there must be order, seamlessness, and security. I believe we are striking the right equilibrium in the town. Mr. Speaker, I think all of us here would know about the Bendown Market. Bendown Market is probably the largest flea market outside of Kingston. I mean, I used to go with my wife's dad to Bendown Market. You get some of the best Clark shoes there. Well, people from all over Jamaica go and sell there. You get some of the best goods there. But the truth be told, the conditions were less than desirable. In fact, the truth is the conditions were deplorable. Deplorable. So, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't in good conscience see all of the investments planned for the development of facilities for tourists and not seek to have some investments for the development of the local. So we have spent $300 million to build a new market. I toured it earlier this year. Lovely facility to replace the Bendown Market. We're going to open it, and I'm certain the member will be there. We're going to open it. It's just on the outskirts of the town. It's not in the center of the town. No, you may have thought about it. You may have thought about it. Anyway. But the market is a lovely facility. Excellent facility. All right. Mr. Speaker, we are doing other improvements to the town. We are building a new berth for cruise ships to come in that could handle both cruise ships and containerized cargo. No, sorry, wrong. No, we're doing a new berth. No, I skipped. That's in Montego Bay. I'm reading to you the Montego Bay script. Go back. There was another market developing in Falmouth. I think they called it that one the tarpaulin. That's the tarpaulin. Yes, the blue tarpaulin vendor arcade. And that, of course, was replaced with better facilities. We're doing work on Water Square, renovating that. But the one that I also like, Mr. Speaker, is that we are introducing the pedal cab. Falmouth is relatively flat, so it's easy to maneuver. And so we are introducing that, and that is another way, Mr. Speaker, for young Jamaicans to participate in the tourism product and share their part of the prosperity. Mr. Speaker, Falmouth, like many of our historic towns, has outgrown the physical infrastructure and town planning laid at its inception. If left to evolve on its own under existing planning regulations and the increasing urbanization demands on the infrastructure of these towns, they will become unsustainable, in fact, unlivable. And I believe that this is now the case facing Falmouth. The government has taken a policy decision to re-establish town centres on a more sustainable basis with smarter and well-laid out facilities and public infrastructure. The Port Authority has identified 50 acres of land in close proximity to the existing town of Falmouth, and the directive is that they should develop this as a new town centre for Falmouth. The old town of Falmouth has significant cultural heritage and historical value. When you talk about the courthouse, the old courthouse, which is now used as the parish council, some of the oldest churches are there. It's a lovely town. And so the strategy now, Mr. Speaker, is to shift businesses out of the town into a newly developed space and then reclaim the old space, develop it and use it for the heritage tourism value. All of that is being done now, Mr. Speaker. Not just talk, action. The Port Authority is also working in Ocherius. And I have an announcement, hopefully, that I'll be able to make. I can't make it today. I really wanted to make it today, but I have to hold back on it. Yeah, let me just make sure. But, Mr. Speaker, the Port Authority has made significant investment in redeveloping the Reynolds Pier in Ocherius. And I believe that that pier has significant potential to become a cruise shipping port. It is, but to develop it along the lines of, say, Falmouth. It has amazing potential. I'd love to make an announcement, but I just can't at this point. But we're working on it. Oh, boy, all right, look. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, after reviewing a damning Auditor General's report of the Factories Corporation of Jamaica, I established a new board of directors. I issued a new mandate to them to improve governance and management controls, optimization of fixed assets and cash assets, and for the company to become a business enabler. Mr. Speaker, I can stand here today and say that I'm proud of the FCJ board and management for the focused and committed way that they have executed their mandate. At the end of 2015-2016 budget year, the financial position of the FCJ was negative $90 million. That's what we took over. Mr. Speaker, after the implementation of a number of business and operational strategies, the financial position in 2016-2017 budget year improved to $209 million. This year, it's even better. This year, the FCJ is projected to make a profit of $330 million. Coming to that. The organizational structure of the FCJ has been strengthened, and a number of management capabilities have been established, which has resulted in the reduction of operational and maintenance costs, greater accuracy in the preparation of engineering designs and costings, greater efficiency in the implementation of projects, better formulation of contracts, which gives greater protection to the company, and enhanced awareness of customer needs and the general public. Mr. Speaker, it is all a matter of good leadership. Economic activity can be seen in the sustained uptick in the demand for commercial and industrial spaces in Jamaica. Last year alone, the demand for space was 470,000 square feet of space island-wide. At Garmex Free Zone, the largest commercial complex on the island, prospective investors demanded over 241,000 square feet of production space. This high demand for space is also reflected in the increase in occupancy from 86% of our factories to 93% of the factories occupied. With this in mind, the government has mandated the board of the FCJ to focus on the implementation of 3 enterprise projects, which will see the construction of over 1.5 million square feet of space over the next 3 to 5 years, dedicated to agro-processing, business process outsourcing, manufacturing, distribution, and warehousing. 30% of this space will be dedicated to small and medium-sized enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the Garmex Free Zone sits on 52.7 acres of land, 8.7 acres of which is unused greenfield, which is ripe for development. The present architectural designs of the existing buildings is of a flat construction. These buildings will be redesigned to create multi-level buildings of higher capacity. This first phase of the project will see the construction of 360,000 square feet of new space across the 14 buildings of varying sizes. The FCJ has already completed the design and has received approval from the KSAC for the construction of 3 new buildings in the first phase, totaling 60,000 square feet. The FCJ has already received approval from PBCJ for the project. The procurement process has already started, and these buildings are expected to be delivered in the second quarter of 2019. Again, Mr. Speaker, action to support our businesses. You're waiting for what is there for the little ones, small people, for the poor people. As we listened to the opposition leader present from the stands last week, present from the grandstands actually, shouting loudly to us on the pitch, we were on the pitch, to use the NHD money to fix squatting. I wondered to myself whether he has not been watching the game since he was bowled out. And whether he has totally forgotten his 22 years on the pitch that did not yield much results. A win is a win. In the 22 years, not much runs, not with the provision of affordable housing, nor any proactive system of land titling. In the last PNP administration, the NHD did 6,298 housing starts, which was less than the number of housing starts under the previous Jamaica Labour Party administration. And I raise it because, you see, the NHD is, again, by virtue of the social justice platform of the PNP, is always trumpeted as, Michael Manley's legacy for social justice. So one would expect that the PNP would use this platform, but we will see what runs they have put on the board. The PNP government, hold on, the PNP government did 1,790 housing starts in 2012. 1,689 housing starts in 2013, 1,549 housing starts in 2014. 1,270 housing starts in 2015. That's the total, 6,298 housing starts over 4 years. Mr. Speaker, in 1 year alone, in the 2017-2018 year, this year, the NHT will complete 5,200 housing starts. That's almost as much as the 4 years of the PNP. 1 year. 1 year. This year, this fiscal year, we will complete 5,200 housing starts. In their 4 years at the Wicked, they did 6,298. Mr. Speaker, yeah,
Order, please. Order.
Mr. Speaker, housing is a critical social need, and the surveys conducted by the NHT suggest that there is unfulfilled demand for housing that far outweighs what the NHT has historically provided. So when we came into office, the policy of the government, the policy direction of the government, and the policy direction we gave to the NHT is to build house. And that is exactly what the NHT has done. They have proceeded with clarity of purpose and focus around the singular objective with no distractions. Mr. Speaker, in only 2 years, we have completed approximately 8,200 housing starts at the NHT, which is 30% more than the PNP did in 4 years. So in our 2 years, there is more, Mr. Speaker. There is more. Having done 8,200, I have some fact checking for you, I have some, come into it. There is more, Mr. Speaker. Having done 8,200 housing starts already, we are already executing plans to do a total of approximately 22,000 housing starts for the 4-year period to 2020, which would triple what the PNP administration did in their tenure. Mr. Speaker, this is action that will transform the lives of the poor people. I make it a point of duty, Mr. Speaker, to attend all the groundbreakings and handing over ceremonies. I don't miss one. It is the most rewarding feeling to see the joy when homeowners receive the keys to their own homes. One recipient said that I place prosperity in her hands. I want them to know that this government celebrates with them the accomplishment of owning their own home. That we celebrate people who want to build their own homes. That we are committed to providing affordable, structured, and orderly pathways to owning your own home. Mr. Speaker, these 22,000 housing starts will be spread across Jamaica, and we are innovating to achieve these higher levels of housing outputs. While the private sector participates in the middle, upper, and upper ends of the housing market, they have largely been absent from the affordable housing market, which we deem to be a market failure. Mr. Speaker, We have therefore instituted a developers program at the NHT whereby the private sector is invited through a competitive process to bid on producing affordable housing on lands owned by the NHT according to specifications and price points provided by the NHT. Once the developers are competitively selected and confirmed, they will be responsible for all stages of the process from planning, approvals, through to construction and completion according to the criteria laid out by the NHT. The developers will bear the financing, construction, and completion risk. But to induce their participation in this end of the market, that is the affordable housing end of the market, the NHT will assume the market risk. So we are correcting the market failure by giving this inducement. And by assuming the market risk, we mean that the NHT will purchase the units if they are not sold at the end of completion. So then the developer bears no risk. Really bears a risk, normal risk, which they would bear anyway if they constructed, if they were building, but the risk is mitigated at the point of completion because the NHT will purchase those units. And I think that, Mr. Speaker, that simple innovation, simple action, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to, figure out the economics behind it. But that simple action, we are certain, Mr. Speaker, will bring in private sector participation in this segment of the market and will augment the NHT's capacity in providing housing for the poor people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, seeing the many and varied demands being placed on the NHT over the years to finance considerations outside of its mandate and seeing the wide gap in housing supply which existed after 40 years of operations and the increasing incidence of informal settlements, particularly around tourist areas, and that is a part of the informal settlement issue is informal settlements around tourist areas that has to be treated urgently. In late 2016, I commissioned a review of the NHT to be led by Ambassador Nigel Clark, now member for Northwestern St. Andrew. The commission, which consisted of members associated with the private sector, the unions, the opposition, and the government, met with stakeholders including NHT contributors, NHT scheme owners, NHT staff, ministries, department, agencies of government, private sector contractors, developers, former chairmen of the NHT, multilaterals, financial institutions. We met with a wide cross-section of stakeholders. And a report was submitted to me in November 2017. I now have the pleasure of tabling the report. It was late. Good. Yes. So the Parliament now has the report in hand. And I, again, just want to pause because I remember when former Prime Minister Pattison started the Education Transformation Project. And the debate was, how would it be funded? The question was answered. We will take $5 billion from the NHT. I found myself in a seriously conflicted position because the position was that we shouldn't take any money, contributors' money from the NHT, but then I wanted the money for education as opposition spokesperson on education at the time. But the conflict of the government, successive governments, pulling at what seems to be a huge reserve of funds at the NHT creates a problem, because what happens is that you have mission drift. The NHT is established to provide housing, but then it ends up doing education, sponsoring the fiscal shortfalls, building police stations, doing all kinds of things. And we are very creative in
in finding all kinds of ways to justify the use of funds dedicated for housing to do everything else. So the idea isn't that we should be able to lock off the NHD, because that is not going to be practical. The idea is that we really need to have an honest conversation as to how we can transform the NHD into the kind of machinery that will be sustainable, deliver housing to its contributors without, and at the same time, without impairing that main responsibility, take on some of the other issues, such as what you shouted from the stands. Use some of the money to deal with squatting. In fact, which is, yes, in fact, Leader of the Opposition, that is one of the main recommendations of the review. That will require some legislative changes. And because I'm aware that when legislation hits this chamber, we don't always have agreement, and the legislation ends up coming out sometimes not what we expect it to be. I thought it would be good to have this review from an objective point of view to guide our deliberation as lawmakers, so that we come up with the right framework for the NHD. So it will, if we are going to do what you propose, what the report proposed, and what I support, which is that we need to use some of the money to deal with squatting, then we have to make sure that it is done in the right way. So I support it, and the report is here to guide our deliberations. At the appropriate time, we will have a debate on it in Parliament, so we get the exchange. But I think we are in a good position to make a truly transformational decision on this national institution, which is the NHD. It may mean as well, because the review also looked at the entire housing sector, that we would have to make some changes to some of the other agencies. For example, if the NHD is going to now take on the responsibility to deal with squatting, then that might be a kind of mission replication, because you already have the housing agency whose mission it is to deal with squatting. And so we may have to also do some public sector rationalization. And the report explores all the options. We can review it and make a decision. Mr. Speaker, the mandate of the HAJ, the Housing Authority, Housing Agency of Jamaica, is to develop housing solutions, provide infrastructure to upgrade informal settlements, and assist with securing titles for homeowners. The HAJ is the agency of government tasked to regularize squatter settlements. It is ironic to hear the Leader of the Opposition talk about using NHD contributor resources to upgrade squatter settlements, because the Housing Agency of Jamaica is one of those agencies that drifted from the path of good management under the PNP administration. When we took over the government, the HAJ was operating at a loss of 885 million Jamaican dollars. I turned to Minister Chang when I saw it, and I said, close it down right away. Close it down right away. Because it was obvious something had gone terribly wrong in the organization. I mean, I gather that housing developments that we started after 4 years were not completed. The cost of the housing solutions escalated to multiple times what the houses could be sold for. Houses that were projected to be sold for $2.5 million end up costing $11 million per house. So, you know, again, the issue of concern about dealing with squatters. I mean, if you really have the concern about the poor, then you have to ensure that government resources are not wasted. The agency established, this is before talking about NHT money now, you already have an agency with a budget, with a loan. We got a loan from China to deal with in 2008. Now, if you have that agency and you are serious about this mandate of regularizing, the first step before you start to look at NHT money, the first step is to make sure that the agency that you already have is fulfilling its mandate. So, before I go out and talk about the social justice aspect of things, I make sure I look about the practical aspect of things. So, when I reach the point to say, this is not serving the interests of the poor, Minister Chang looked at me and said, Prime Minister, give me one more chance with it. Let me put you in a new board and manage it. And I said, this one is on your head. I am pleased to announce that under this administration, the housing agency for the last financial year turned a profit of $183 million. And for this financial year, will turn a profit of over $800 million. So the member from Northern Clarendon was asking me, what is in there for the little people? Yes. Well, look, you can't help the poor if you are making losses. I want to congratulate the board, in particular the board chairman, for continuing to strengthen and stabilize the board. The agency, having focused on returning to profitability and ensuring accountability, will now use those profits to focus on improving the value-added services and opportunities to deliver housing solutions to the people. They will use the profits earned to regularize informal communities by expanding its capability to provide affordable housing through innovative housing solution design and project execution. But I want to share something else with you, which is important to the point made by the leader of the opposition that we should use the NHT funds. We had already started a program, not fully conceptualized, as to how we would tackle squatting and informal settlement. The first element of the strategy was to rapidly increase the number of housing solutions available in the market. You really need a market-oriented solution to deal with that problem. And getting the NHT to work and getting private sector people to increase the investment in housing will deal with partially some of the squatting problems. The other part of it is that there are some housing settlements that you will not be able to regularize using a market solution. And so what we directed the HAJ to do is to go around and look at all the squatter communities in Jamaica and immediately start to assess what it would take to immediately do an upgrading exercise of their infrastructure and their housing units. And get them on the titling system. Immediately, Mr. Speaker, we have already completed 60 communities in terms of assessment. So 60 communities we have already done. So if this Parliament decided to make the decision that we are going to use some NHT funds, we could immediately transition into a procurement exercise because we already know the scope of work that is necessary to address the housing, the upgrading of those quarter settlements. And so the HAJ has already done that. We are ahead of the game on that. Again, Mr. Speaker, simple action that will have significant effect. So, Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the HAJ 2018-19 budget year, that's next year, the HAJ intends to start the construction of 1,866 solutions. 224 in Greenpond, St. James, 330 in Grange Pen, St. James, that's a brownfield. Another 300 in same Grange Pen, that's a greenfield. In Bernard Lodge, 300. In Shooters Hill, St. Catherine, 200. Reed's Pen, 80. Bel-Air, 2. In St. Anne, 132. Whitehall, 4 townhouses in West, oh, Whitehall, 4 in Westmoreland, 100 housing solutions. Bel-Air, yes. Not you, Minister. We have 300. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Come on, please.
This government is serious about taking action to improve access, ownership, and security of land and housing for every citizen of Jamaica. We want every Jamaican to enjoy the feeling of prosperity and have a comfortable home in an orderly fashion. We are not just paying lip service to this. In 2 years, we have taken more action to have the widest impact and effect on the prosperity of the people. By the completion of this term of my administration, we would have built more homes and given more titles to Jamaicans than did in the last 22 years of the PNP administration. Mr. Speaker, some people want to be known as the great conceptualizer. Some people, great orator, great thinker. I want to be known, Mr. Speaker, as the great builder of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, sustainable physical development is a national imperative for this government. Development must, however, protect the environment and be orderly to safeguard the future of our people. In response to the need to increase the housing stock, provide wider options for housing solutions, increase efficiency of urban lands, and reduce commuting costs and protect environmentally sensitive areas, there will be a rationalizing of densities island-wide. And I want the members to pay keen attention to this. Mr. Speaker, there is pressing need to develop and improve the physical infrastructure of our cities and urban centers. Presently, the development trend is towards dormitory communities and suburbs for housing, and then a massive commute back and forth to the city for work. A more efficient use of urban space and expensive infrastructure is to create well-planned residential options within the city. Presently, the government is engaged in an extensive program of road widening intersection improvements, and introducing smart traffic management technologies. I mean, a lady commented to me that she never seen so much roads being patched in Jamaica before. We ask the public to bear with us while we make these improvements to the traffic infrastructure. However, these improvements have a limit in the relief they bring. We can only widen the road so far. We can only improve the intersection so much. Ultimately, we have to make some decisions about what we are going to do with the valuable real estate that is lying underutilized in downtown Kingston, in close proximity to centers of employment and production. While workers have to commute many miles, wasting time, fuel, and enduring the stress of travel. As an island, land availability is a more binding constraint. No one can argue that we have not utilized our lands in the most strategic ways. As demand for housing and urban facilities increase against a finite land resource, a compelling case is made to review existing residential densities and heights as an integral part of Jamaica's spatial development strategy. Mr. Speaker, the government has taken a policy decision to look at increasing densities, especially in urban areas, to maximize the use of scarce land resources and to take advantage of economies of scale in respect of infrastructural investments such as central sewage systems and mass transit. Mr. Speaker, there are criteria and justification for increasing residential density. Density is a planning concept used to regulate the magnitude of developments in a particular area and can be calculated using a measure of habitable rooms per hectare or some other measure. Mr. Speaker, the maximum allowable density is a function of many factors, such as population trend growth versus the actual physical size of the country, and many other issues. A number of areas in Kingston and St. Andrew are being looked at for increased densities. However, there will be no compromising the environmental and aesthetic standards, nor any devaluation of areas that are residential in character. Mr. Speaker, the height of buildings will depend on the constraints placed by the planning authorities. That is the Civil Aviation Authority, the Town and Country Planning Authority, NEPA, and the municipal corporations. I am advised that the Town and Country Planning Authority and NEPA, along with selected professionals, are having discussions with the Civil Aviation Authority in coming to a final determination as to the zones in the city where greater height can be attained without compromising aircraft safety. The prescribed zones will be named when the NEPA and the Town and Country Planning Authority completes the consultations with the stakeholders. Other urban and suburban areas in Jamaica, including Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, and Negril, will also be included based on the criteria factors listed as agreed on by NEPA and the Town and Country Planning Authority. Mr. Speaker, this development focus and strategy will also provide for the renewal of older neighborhoods and housing stock and begin to stem suburban sprawl. And that is a new emerging phenomenon. We are building out right around Kingston dormitory communities. When you have land in Kingston, that we really should be encouraging its development. It is imperative that densities, especially on the plains, be increased in order to further enhance sustainable development opportunities, reduce carbon footprint, and maximize the use of scarce urban land. Mr. Speaker, the decision to allow greater densities and heights will be dependent on whether the intended development proposal satisfies all the relevant planning and other criteria governing developments. Mr. Speaker, in general, the areas will be selected on the following main factors. The areas have central location, they have access to bus routes and arterial roads, they are relatively flat and well-drained terrain, ability for connection to present or planned sewer mains, and relatively large lot size and potential for amalgamation. Mr. Speaker, Kingston City is entering into a new phase in its existence. I would like to think of it as a period of renewal. I'm sure you cannot recall seeing so many construction cranes in the city at once. Government cannot build all the new residential and commercial infrastructure required. The private sector must take the lead. We want developers to be assured that the government is making the right policy decisions to incentivize their investments, as long as they abide by the rules and respect environmental and aesthetic standards. Now is the time for developers to consider investing in the city and urban areas. Let's make Kingston the cleanest, smartest, greenest, friendliest, safest, and most modern city in the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that last week, Cabinet approved the Bernard Lodge Land Use Master Plan for the development of an urban community in the area. Again, Mr. Speaker, we consider the issue of the urban sprawl. Many developers had their eyes on the Bernard Lodge lands, and the sugar company was willing to sell. But we don't want the haphazard development that is happening now. The Cabinet therefore decided to develop a master plan for those lands. I saw the presentation. It was well done. I think it's one of the best master plans. It allows for residential, commercial, light industrial, but importantly, agricultural use. All in one. All in one. So it's not just residents. It's literally creating a new town so that people can live close to where they work and work close to where they live. Provision is made for environmental issues, for drainage, for infrastructure, and the way in which, and social services. The way in which the infrastructure is going to be provided is that the people who want to access the land will have to pay an impact fee. They will have to participate in the development of the infrastructure. And so we are taking a different approach to how we approve development. When this is complete, having gone through the processes prescribed by government, 17,000 new homes, commercial and agricultural development. 17,000 new homes plus the other uses will be accommodated in this area.
Agro-processing.
So if you're talking, Mr. Speaker, about us expanding options and access to housing and communities, this government is going to make a radical transformation of the housing landscape in the country. Mr. Speaker, by now it is clear to the public that the government is sparing no effort to address the security situation in the country. Last Sunday, on the advice of the security forces, I advised the Governor General to declare a state of public emergency in a section of St. Catherine, approximating the St. Catherine North Police Division. Mr. Speaker, we will continue our commitments to enhance security measures through zones of special operations and states of public emergencies, as well as a suite of other intelligence-driven and targeted response. It has significantly reduced violence in areas in which the enhanced measures have been implemented and has given confidence to the residents that their safety and security is being taken seriously. These and other strategies will continue to be rolled out as resources become available. At an appropriate time, the Minister of National Security will update the Parliament in more details on the operational and strategic results of the state of emergency. Mr. Speaker, the two main threats to our national security are guns and gangs. Those are the two main threats. There is a legitimate call for a plan of action around which the nation can rally, and I've heard the calls. We have developed elements of such a plan. However, a key element which is not currently there is political consensus. I have started the process of reaching out to the opposition to build this consensus, and I have seen reciprocal signs. The very oral talks are scheduled to begin soon, and I'm hopeful that an understanding can be reached. I have invited the opposition spokesman on security to attend the next sitting of the National Security Council to discuss elements of the crime plan and to share the ideas the opposition would like to see incorporated in such a plan. The political consensus is necessary, as we would have learned from the passage of the Zone of Special Operations. The National Security Plan, the Plan Secure Jamaica, calls for new legislation and amendments to existing legislation. The process could yield less effective results if there is no common understanding. I am confident we can reach an understanding to put national security above politics in the same way the government and the opposition have rallied around to pass legislation relating to IMF targets. Mr. Speaker, the government will be bringing a series of amendments to the Firearm Act to Parliament in order to discourage the possession and or dealing in illegal firearms and ammunition. There will be a number of new offenses such as trafficking, dealing, and distributing, which will better define the various illicit activities within the illegal firearm trade. It is wholly unacceptable that so many lives are being lost to persons with illegal firearms, and this administration resolves to treat with this problem with the seriousness it deserves. The amendments will also streamline the regulation of the legal firearm trade and the functions and activities of the Firearm Licensing Authority. In this regard, I must emphasize that the ownership of a private firearm is not a right, and therefore a clear need must be demonstrated, and fit and proper standards and detailed due diligence must be applied to the granting of licenses. Mr. Speaker, for too long, persons with gang associations and those who are part of criminal organizations have been proceeding with impunity. Currently, research is being undertaken to guide the establishment of a watch list. Persons placed on the watch list by the courts will be subject to enhanced surveillance and other measures. Mr. Speaker, for too long we have accepted the concept of a Don as an almost legitimate leader in our society. They are able to move freely and conduct their illicit activities as they like. This freedom allows them to have associations and influence over key functionaries in the community and broader society, including law enforcement officers. And when I say law enforcement, I'm not just talking police. You have law enforcement in customs. You have law enforcement in immigration, in revenue protection. It's amazing how information about some of our operations, within minutes of the decisions being taken, the criminal dons know. We get back the intelligence reports. Mr. Speaker, in other countries, the equivalent of their dons who plan and execute mass gruesome killings, challenge the authority of the state, and drive fear into citizens, they are placed on watch lists. Their movements are curtailed. This allows the state to limit and better collect information on their activities. It is now time to decisively deal with gang leaders and dons. Mr. Speaker, I listened to the opposition presentation last week, and they seemed intent on having the Jamaican people forget how we really got to where we are. It is therefore necessary that I spend some time to correct the false narratives and deliberate inaccuracies posited in their presentation. Well, let's start with basket of prices. Mr. Speaker, last week we heard the leader of the opposition speaking about massive price increases since 2015. Mr. Speaker, we found the prices being quoted by him to be very interesting. Very interesting. You know, you can't, since we come in, no, I can't tell you last I hear about that. Mr. Speaker, after Parliament, we received numerous calls from many Jamaicans that someone was either misleading the opposition leader or perhaps the opposition leader only shops at the most expensive supermarkets. Mr. Speaker, we know the reality, but being prudent, we did our checks. We have the receipts. Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader said that the price of flour is $65 today, when it was $45 in 2015. The fact, however, based on the Consumer Affairs Commission survey of March 8th to 9th this month, the price of flour at Brooklyn Supermarket, at Clock Tower Plaza, Super Value in Havendale, and Shoppers Fair in Duane Park is $43, which is less than the $45 he said it was. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, he said a tin of sardines.
Order, please, order. Order on both sides. Let the Prime Minister make his presentation without disruption.
Mr. Speaker, he said a tin of sardine is now $160, up from $108 in 2015. But the same supermarkets sell sardine at $120. Betty Milk, which he said was $268, is actually $225 at the same supermarket. So my opposition leader, my wife Juliet asked me to give you a frugal tip. Change your shopping habits. You're spending too much.
Okay, members, the Prime Minister is not able to correct his presentation.
Maybe you could buy some more macaroni with the change. The Jamaican people will not forget that during a period when the world economy grew at an unprecedented rate in the 1990s and early 2000s, the PNP government of that time presided over the largest growth in national debt of any administration in Jamaica. I'm going to address that very point you made, because it's a very important point. In Jamaica, in Jamaican dollars,
all the members, please.
In Jamaican dollars, our national debt under the PNP soared from approximately $45 billion in 1990-91 to almost $1 trillion by 2007, an increase of approximately 2,000%. And this was accompanied by horrendous experiences of personal ruin. The PNP government liberalized the financial system without adequate controls, rules, and regulations, and coupled this sorry state of affairs with an ill-advised high interest rate monetary policy that precipitated a spectacularly massive financial crisis, one of the largest such crises in the world measured as a percentage of GDP, otherwise called FinSac. They created FinSac, and in so doing, issued $140 billion worth of debt to recapitalize financial institutions. What they did, Mr. Speaker, was to socialize private debt, meaning that they took the debt of the private individual to the banks and of banks themselves and placed it on the national debt on the backs of the poor people of Jamaica. Now, you know, it's very important because I know some people are saying, why is he going back there? But you see, unlike your point, member from South St. Andrew, that, well, the debt at one time in the 80s was, what, 100 and 200% of GDP. It's a slight difference, because by the time you got into office, that the effect of that debt overhang would have already been cleared. You had several debt write-offs with the Paris Club and all kinds of of forgiveness. So, you know, and then we grew out of that debt crisis. I mean, that was caused by a fallout in backside earnings. So there was no, I just want to be clear that debt that was at that time was not a overhang. We have to go back to the 1990s. For those who say, why are you going back there? We have to go back there because that is the origin of our present situation. It's the origin. It is, I know, and I'm going to be, please, I'm going to be as fair as I can in dissecting this matter. And it might be uncomfortable for some listening. But I believe that the Parliament needs some kind of catharsis on this issue. The report from the FinCEN Commission should come shortly, and I'm really hoping that we can have some honest debate on it. But because of the nature of the presentation made by the opposition, I thought it necessary that I don't allow a false narrative to take root in the minds of the Jamaican people. Because the truth is, many of our electors would not even be born yet or at the age of understanding when the origin of this problem occurred. So we have to put it. So let's start, let's look at it. So,
please.
The ethos of the PNP is social justice. I want you to appreciate that, you know, because the philosophy of the PNP is, if you're a national organization, then I'm part of the nation. So, I think the dilemma, leader of the opposition, and it's a real dilemma, the real dilemma, should the poor people bear the financial profligacy of persons who have access to great wealth? But that's the flip side of the question. I mean, if your ethos is social justice, is it social justice? Is it social justice for the poor people of Jamaica to bear the debts of poor decisions of asset holders? Is it right? And that is the question that needs to be answered. No, leader of the opposition, I am not going to debate. I am not going to debate the soundness of that policy choice. As I said, let the FinCEN.
Order, please. Members on both sides. Keep the excitement down. Let the Prime Minister make his presentation.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that we are going to debate the soundness of the policy choice in the face of a large financial crisis. The same question the leader of the opposition raised. But the cause of the crisis is beyond debate. Amen. The crisis was caused by the failed policies of the PNP administration of the day. With the stroke of a pen, by the single executive decision, the national debt ballooned to unsustainable levels, with the debt to GDP ratio growing from 70% in 1996 to just under 125% by 2003 and falling to just under 115% 40% by 2006, 2007 when we took office. By policy choice, the financial sector crisis therefore became a national debt crisis, and both were attributable to the PNP's neglectful handling of the Jamaican economy. Jamaica is still haunted by the irresponsible economic decisions of that period. The tragedy is that 20 years later, we still find ourselves in the grip of the national debt crisis. It has taken an entire generation to right the economic wrongs of the PNP government of the 1990s, and we are still mired in the economic problem they created. The national debt crisis was worsened by the reckless management of state enterprises that borrowed at high interest rates, pursued questionable strategies, incurred large losses, and then were brought onto the books for the taxpayer to repay. Like HAJ, like Factories Corporation, like JUTC, like CAP. That created the national debt that we now have, which we're still paying for. So, okay, we're coming. So the national debt dynamics began to overwhelm and dominate the economy. The PNP government high-handedly pursued, and this is undeniable, pursued a combination of high interest rate and high inflation at the same time to keep itself afloat. I mean, so the university needs to do a real study on this. How you pursue these two policies at the same time. High inflation policy was used in an attempt to inflate the debt away. High interest rate policy was applied to ensure that government remained funded to prevent capital flight and to project some measure of external viability, only fooling ourselves. So, Mr. Speaker, the central bank was hijacked to keep the government afloat, with grave consequences for the people of Jamaica. Over various years in this period, a PNP government that claims that it is for the poor ran inflation rates of 17%, 25%, 30%, 40%, and even 80%. No, man. You forget the 90s.
You can't recall the 90s, right?
Mr. Speaker.
You can't recall. Okay, we get it.
What nerve of the leader of the opposition to speak of price rises in the past 2 years with inaccurate data. Now, anyone who knows anything about economics knows that inflation rates of those absurd levels are like weapons of mass destruction directed against the poor. Under the PNP government, for several years, example 2003, 2004, 2004, 2005, and 2005, 2006. Interest costs plus public sector compensation costs exceeded or approximated the entire tax revenue of the country. Interest rate costs.
Is that true? Is that true?
So they collect tax revenues, and after they have spent on paying the cost of the debt, they accumulated. So after they have paid the cost of the debt, they have accumulated, and paying public sector workers. That's it. The tax revenues are done. They don't, amazing, they don't yet account for medicine, hospital, school books, or schools, police stations, or even national security. As a result, there was chronic underinvestment in Jamaica's social and physical infrastructure during this time. And we are still feeling the effects to this day. No, it is not the PNP government.
What do you mean by rubbish? That is rubbish?
Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to wait till tomorrow.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, man. Members, please.
It is not that the PNP government never got advice. The truth is that them ignore the advice. Everyone should read the various IMF reports on Jamaica during this period. Even after Tata IMF, the IMF still did reports on Jamaica. And they make interesting reading. I read them for this presentation in preparation. Mr. Speaker, one presentation, one review of Jamaica during the PNP era of that 18 and a half years was done by the World Bank. It's the 2005 review of Jamaica's public expenditure. I encourage all Jamaicans who want to get a real understanding of the fiscal management of the country under the PNP, or rather mismanagement, to just go on the internet because Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Jamaicans
Order.
I encourage all Jamaicans to read the World Bank's 2005 review of Jamaica's public expenditure performance. It is an independent but shocking account of the PNP's recklessness. The economy was characterized by grave macroeconomic instability, structural disincentives to produce, high levels of uncertainty, and a huge premium for parking cash in the vaults of government, earning ridiculously, really high returns. The PNP government of the 90s and early 2000s, therefore, represented the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of Jamaica. And it's not me say so. It's not me say so. Those assets were shielded from the ravages of the PNP's hyperinflationary policy. Those with cash had unimaginable levels of income from the government's high interest rate policy. Amazing. So the PNP created an economy that incentivized taking your cash and putting it in government paper. And in fact, it so warped the minds of the Jamaican people that somehow investment was never considered to be going out there and starting a business. What we understood investment to be was to take our money and put it in government paper. And so if you had money, but here's the real issue now. If you had money, that means you had an income and you're rich, and you put your money in government paper. The probability is that the interest rate would be higher than the inflation rate. The interest rate would be higher than the inflation rate, so you're getting a higher real return. But if you have no income, or you have a fixed income, or you have a small business, which means you're poor, you are not going to benefit from the interest rates. What you are going to face is the constant erosion of any income that you have because of inflation. And again, it raises the question of the social justice ethos of the PNP. How was that socially just?
Social injustice, Prime Minister. Social injustice.
You talk about our 1.5. You talk about what we gave in 1.5 and talk about social equity. The PNP needs to answer for those 18 years of social injustice to the poor. What we have done with 1.5 created social safety net protection, made sure that it was horizontally equitable, made sure that we protected the poor, and at the same time secured increased tax revenues, which we in turn use to support the programs of the poor, like home and housing and park. It galls me, it hurts me that the Jamaican people have been fed this diet that the PNP love the poor. There is nothing in the PNP's history of the 90s and 2000s that show any care for the poor. All of their policies have been destructive to the poor. And that is why, you know, when you made that presentation, I sat and I listened carefully. Listen to it carefully, because
order, please. Members, I wish to hear the Prime Minister alone. Go ahead, sir.
If it is one thing, Mr. Speaker, that I must ensure, is that the Jamaican people are never fooled again by the PNP. As a result of the economic incentives, skewed against production, manufacturing and other companies, left Jamaica in droves during this PNP reign, relocating to Trinidad, Dominican Republic, and various Central American countries. In the process, Jamaica lost employment, skills, and technological transfer, and most importantly, confidence. I want to spend a little time on the origins of fiscal responsibility, because the presentations made last week seem to suggest that fiscal responsibility is the preserve of the PNP, that it started in 2012. Well, they made it seem as if fiscal responsibility is something that originated with them. I want to just set the record straight. It was Manayard, oddly so. And I remember it so well when we were in opposition, oddly. When you used to tell them, go and talk to the multilaterals. You are borrowing at 20% when you could get loan at 2%. And I remember distinctly the then Minister of Finance brush him aside, laugh at him, say him talking foolishness. Could get single-digit loan. They were so wedded to this high interest rate policy that the success of the government was that we went on the international market and we got millions of US dollars to borrow. Don't mind the rate, but we got millions. Don't mind the rate. That was the success of the government. I'm coming to that. It was Prime Minister Bruce Golding who pointed out.
Order, please.
It was Prime Minister Bruce Golding who pointed out how unsustainable our debt was, and who first made debt reduction a national priority with the debt exchange. Yes. Today, there is bipartisan consensus around just because the PNP had a few years of fiscal straitjacketing under heavy international supervision, don't expect the Jamaican people to believe that the foundational instincts of the PNP has changed. So while the world was booming in the 1990s and early 2000s, under the PNP, Jamaica was suffocating in high debt to take advantage and unable to take advantage of favorable global conditions. The global environment then changed due to factors in 2009. There was a global recession. Jamaica was heavily exposed with high levels of the inherited public debt, ramshackle fiscal accounts, weak public management, and a distorted economic incentive structure. Overnight, bauxite companies that were part of a complex international commercial organization found that it did not make sense for them to continue producing in Jamaica for varied reasons. Jobs were lost and export revenues shrank. Due to job losses from the global crisis in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, remittances to Jamaica shriveled and our balance of payment was imperiled. Corresponding banks reeling from the financial compression that accompanied the global recession cut their corresponding banking lines to Jamaica, which sucked liquidity and in turn affected Jamaican businesses. Tax revenue in Jamaica collapsed as the compounded effect of these forces meant reduced consumption in Jamaica, reduced income for Jamaicans, and reduced economic activity in Jamaica. This is what the JLP government of 2007 inherited: a chronically weak, highly indebted, and vulnerable domestic economic environment facing the full onslaught of the worst global recession in 70 years. We then approached the IMF for a standby facility to help Jamaica navigate these unprecedented global conditions. We approached the IDB, as we advocated in opposition, to support us with development loans, which were much more affordable than those during Omar Davis's adventure. It was therefore the JLP government of 2007 that for the first time pursued policies that considered the national debt as unsustainable. It was the JLP government of 2007 that secured Jamaica from an unimaginably high interest rate and high inflation rate policy. It was the JLP government of 2007 that first expressed and codified in law debt to GDP targets in the Financial Administration Act of 2010 as part of Jamaica's fiscal rule framework. Argue as if that wasn't done in 2010. The target was set to be 100% of GDP by 2016, as my recollection. It didn't start with your government. It was, hold on. It was the JLP government of 2007 that expressed wage to GDP targets into law, recognizing from 2010 the unsustainability of borrowing to compensate public sector workers. It was the JLP government of 2007 that embraced fiscal responsibility, and by so doing, it became part of the political vernacular. The word fiscal responsibility never emerged in any conversation of the PNP in the 1990s and early 2000s. Never. I have searched the record. Your Minister of Finance never used it. Your Prime Ministers never used it. Fiscal responsibility was never part of the PNP's DNA. It was the JLP government of 2007 that, in pursuit of greater fiscal certainty, divested state agencies such as the Sugar Company of Jamaica, the sugar factories, and Air Jamaica, which was losing at the time tens of billions of dollars. That's undeniable. We took these difficult steps at the time to restore Jamaica's fiscal stability. That is arguable. Hold on. The point is that fiscal responsibility did not exist in the 18.5-year PNP government. The fresh shoots of a new fiscal responsibility paradigm first appeared in the Bruce Golding administration of 2007. The opposition would have us believe that one man just wave a magic wand and boops, things change. You didn't wave any magic wand. But, Mr. Speaker, there is another part of the story which must be told. When I was sworn in as Prime Minister in October 2011, I devoted a substantial portion of my first speech as Prime Minister to the necessity of addressing the challenge posed by our national debt with sustained fiscal discipline. You can go and check that. As Prime Minister, towards the end of 2011, I went to the people of Jamaica in a mass meeting with tens of thousands in attendance and with full media saturation, and told the people the truth, that fiscal consolidation had to be pursued and it would only gain momentum. I think I termed it as bitter medicine. Of course, the story is well known. I found myself as leader of the opposition within weeks. But the people of Jamaica later learned that I had told them the truth. The truth of bitter medicine, therefore, prepared the minds of the Jamaican people for what was to come. So by 2012, you had a government that had no practical choice but to pursue a path of national debt reduction centered around fiscal consolidation. And an opposition that had just campaigned on a platform that included the critical need for debt reduction and sustainability through fiscal discipline. The tables were set, and these conditions made for great receptivity in the public. Fortunately for Jamaica, the political dynamics aligned in such a way that getting to fiscal responsibility was inevitable. By 2013, there was therefore societal consensus and deep resolve to address the problem of unsustainable national debt. The government, the opposition, the unions, academia, and private sector were all of the view that this was a necessity, and stakeholders contributed to the success in their own way. And now you want to come here and talk as if it's only one hand clapped. It is the arrogance of the PNP that leads them to ignore the role played by the civil servants. The workers who sacrifice through the workers who sacrificed through wage freezes to achieve the fiscal certainty that you are coming to claim ownership for. Right? And now, to behave as if when we were the opposition, we played our part. There was no bill that you brought to Parliament. And I, as leader of the opposition, there was no bill that came here that I didn't tell my team support it. Sometimes they give us not even a day's notice. When you were working on the bills, our members were there with you in committees working on those bills. Don't try to claim it as if it is yours. It was a national effort. No, we are not here trying to deny that the PNP government successfully negotiated an IMF deal in 2013 and executed by passing all the IMF tests. That we're not trying to take that away from you. No, not brush over it. I am the one acknowledging it here, not brush over it. And it is to your credit. But at the same time, it is only poetic justice that you who created the problem played a significant role in the solution. And that is it. That is it. So I don't want us to be coming here and gloating and trying to claim. It is a national effort. And in my last presentation, my last budget speech, I tried to set that context to say, let's work together on these fiscal issues. Now, let's not try to get into a political fight. But you couldn't resist. You couldn't resist. You know. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, I think we have clearly set the record. Yes, we have clearly set the record on this matter. We have clearly set the record straight.
Daddy, shut up down there.
Order, please.
It is good that Jamaica's fiscal discipline is a part of our political economy. It is good that the recognition and understanding of how sustainable national debt can retard development, stifle national ambitions, and compromise sovereignty is now widespread. Though this is the case, Mr. Speaker, the connection between high wage bill, national debt, and growth still escapes us. Mr. Speaker, there was a time under previous administration when former Minister of Finance would say, run with it. Just before an election. There was a time when interest costs and compensation exceeded tax revenues. There have been improvements in interest costs since, moving from approximately 17% of GDP in 2003 to approximately 7% of GDP currently. That's a big improvement in our fiscal position. However, compensation costs, including employers' contribution to health and pension schemes, which was 11% of GDP in 2003-2004, remained in a similar range, approximately 10% today. Tax revenues, at approximately 26% of GDP in 2017-2018, with tax revenues at approximately 26% of GDP in 2017-2018, wages defined and interest still represent a substantial majority of tax revenues. In fact, when you take the wages and interest, they are now 65% of total tax revenues. A big change, but still significant, 65% of tax revenues. So, Mr. Speaker, let me be among the first to say in this House that this is unsustainable. This is not to blame public sector employees. Let me repeat, no one is blaming the hard-working, patriotic public sector employee. This mismanagement of the economy over the long period of time has resulted in a financial sector crisis and a national debt crisis. However, the debt overhang is our inheritance, and we have to deal with it. Mr. Speaker, if Jamaica is to grow and develop, we have to have inclusive, nurturing, and caring societies. Government spending will have to be reprioritized towards critical growth areas, infrastructure spending, and poverty alleviation. When 70% of our budget is consumed by fixed costs of wages and interest, even prior to the start of the financial year, this is a recipe to stay where we are economically, or to reverse the fragile gains we have collectively and painstakingly made. Mr. Speaker, we on this side believe that it was essential that the need for economic expansion take center stage, and that economic growth should also be a central part of the political economy. The IMF provides policy advice on best fiscal practice and the architecture, as well as guidance on monetary policy and associated framework. However, there is no real counterpart multilateral institution for growth. The World Bank does give some advice, and the IDB does support, but not in the monitoring way that the IMF does. When we conceived the Economic Growth Council, there was more than one goal. First was to help in the transition of economic growth from the periphery of the political economy to the center. This first objective of the ECG has therefore been met. Mr. Speaker, in meeting that objective, we went around and had consultations with a broad cross-section of Jamaica, including the opposition. We consulted to get your policies. We consulted to hear your thinking on growth. And we put that in a document that is the Economic Growth Council. And they gave that document to the government, which effectively creates a roadmap of growth strategies and policies that the government should pursue. So they have completed the task that they have been given in terms of making growth a buzzword. And when Michael Leachin, the great marketer that he is, came up with the idea of 5 in 4, it was to get the average man excited about the prospects and possibilities of growth. That is what 5 in 4 is. It is the representation of the aspiration that we can grow and grow quickly. And get out of it. There's nothing wrong with that. 1%. So if you ask about growth policy, growth policy is now a part of the political economy. The average man now, instead of talking about poverty and austerity, and he's talking now about the economy must grow. And that's very important. Yes, growth is now part of the political vernacular. The EGC, the Economic Growth Council, will now transition to a new phase. The Economic Growth Council will now transition to a new phase. And that is the phase similar to what EPOC does. It will transition to a role similar to that of EPOC. EPOC was established to ensure that the policies of fiscal responsibility and discipline that were agreed, that there was an independent stakeholder body that would ensure the oversight of government actions, and that government should be faithful to those policies. The EGC will now take on its monitoring role to see to it that the government is executing the growth policies that we agreed to in the document that they prepared and sent to us. So the EGC has that new responsibility now, and you will begin to see that being rolled out, giving regular updates to the country about the government's performance and specific growth-related policies. It has another function which it is currently working on, and that is to become ambassadors for investment. And the members of the EGC are now working in their private capacity to bring in large investors into the island. At another time, I'll give a more comprehensive report on the function of the EGC in this regard. But I'm addressing the issue of the Economic Growth Council because, again, the presentation of the opposition is to suggest that the Economic Growth Council is a failure because the country has not achieved the growth target set of 2.5%. So again, I want to place the Economic Growth Council in context. This is part of the social consensus mechanism to hold government to account for growth policy. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition spoke about macaroni.
Bobby, I said keep quiet, all you have left is mouth. I'm going to buy a wheelchair. Just shut up over there.
And Mr. Speaker, we couldn't figure out who he was calling macaroni, or who he was referring to. But Mr. Portland found macaroni. Apparently, Mr. Speaker, macaroni operates a bus. And he lent his bus. He lent his bus for a day to a friend who happens to be a supporter of the leader of the opposition. And the friend, Mr. Speaker, the friend crashed the bus. And everybody now wants to blame macaroni. I mean, the story is just so ironic, apropos. I mean, the story is the leader of the opposition in his presentation tried to blame the government for everything. But the truth is that It wasn't we who drove the bus and wrecked it and created the problem. It was you who was driving the bus in the 1990s and wrecked the country. You, sir. You are macaroni. And I believe macaroni is here. I believe macaroni is here. So macaroni.
May I advise members in the gallery? Order, please. Members in the gallery, when you came in, you were advised.
Macaroni gave me a message.
Not to participate.
He said, leave him alone. Don't call him name. All right? Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have so much things to say, but the hour is what it is, and I'm going to scrap the rest of the speech because there's so much to report, so much good news to give to the country about the actions of this government, actions yielding prosperity. Mr. Speaker, I have shown that the government is taking positive actions in securing the prosperity of the people. Our stewardship of the government has been effective in delivering jobs, housing, and infrastructure development. Mr. Speaker, Jamaicans are ambitious people. We want to see our country grow. We want to be able to enjoy the beauty and tranquility of our country, free of crime and violence. The government has not shirked from the difficult challenges of crime and low economic growth. Any fair observer would agree that the government is working hard and smart in this regard. Achieving economic growth and conquering the crime monster are national goals. Let us elevate these goals above politics and work together to achieve them. Mr. Speaker, this is a relay. The opposition PNP has handed over the baton at the penultimate leg. It shouldn't be that they are hoping that we will drop the baton or pull up in such a critical race or celebrate when our growth time looks slow. Let us be like our winning Olympic relay team in these matters, doing our best and hoping for the best for Team Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, prosperity is a destiny for all Jamaicans. Let us maintain a positive outlook and hopeful minds. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Action your prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Members in the gallery, please keep your seat and await the adjournment of the House. Okay, members, the House is still in session. Order now, please. Mr. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the suspension of the debate on the appropriation bill until tomorrow, 2 o'clock, when the Honourable Minister of Finance will close the debate.
Those in favour? Those against? As have it. This Honorable House stands.
Mr. Speaker, is not intended to do any further business today, so I ask for the House to be adjourned until tomorrow, 2 p.m.
The motion is that the House be adjourned until tomorrow at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As have it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned. All members in the gallery stay put until the mace go through the door. Please.